Hello and welcome on Tête-à-Tête here on France 24. Our guest today is the Minister of Armed Forces and Veteran Affairs, Catherine Vautrin. Hello.
Good morning, Mark Paradman.
We are at the Hôtel de Brienne in the office of General de Gaulle at a time when there is once again war. We'll talk about the war in Ukraine, but now obviously the war in Iran. According to the Trump administration, the Iranian regime's military capabilities have been considerably weakened and the regime's defeat is imminent. Do you share this assessment?
Well, I would be more reserved. That is to say, what we've seen since the beginning of this war, which started on 28 February, and we are now the 13th of March, we see that, indisputably, the Iranians have used many missiles, many drones. Yet, I am not in a position to say that they have no reserves left. I can say that, yes, a lot of their stock has been used, but to say whether we're near the end of the war, no. The other thing is to know what the ultimate goal by the United States and Israel is. And at this point, we don't know what this final effect is.
When you ask them, what do they say? Regime change? Or are they trying to leave the regime in place, but greatly weakened?
That is precisely where it's very interesting to try to have the most precise answer, because one of the questions is the following. The ultimate goal sought by the U.S. and Israel is the United States wanting to take out the supreme leader. Yes, that was done on the first day. But there's also the issue of the possession of nuclear weapons by Iran. Has this effect been reached? We have no certainty of this, and there were other possible consequences they wanted. We don't know what they are. Does Israel have the same ultimate goals, or does it want to go further than the United States? That's one of the questions we have.
Are you worried Donald Trump will decide to end the war too quickly? For economic reasons, the price of oil, for political reasons, the midterm elections, and ultimately that the situation could be worse than it was before February 28th?
Well, you know, I think words have a meaning, and President Macron, when he addressed the French people, said immediately that what we wanted was to have a diplomatic track prevail, because no one would want a war. That's the first thing. The second point, if the Americans were to decide to withdraw, would this mean that immediately the Israelis would stop? We don't know. So you see, there you have two countries that went into war, and we don't know if they have the exact same wishes. So if the Americans were to stop, would the Israelis stop at the same time? That's still a question we have.
Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister on France 24 warned European countries, among others, that all those who in any way support what he calls the war of aggression by Israel and Iran against his country would face Iranian retaliation. Do you consider this as a direct threat against France?
You know, France's position is extremely clear. France, immediately from the first minute of this war, said what our priorities were. The first priority is the protection of our nationals, protecting our French nationals. We have 400,000 French nationals there. Second point is protection of our assets. We have embassies, we have military assets, we also have companies there in that region. The third element is the ability to respond to the requests for assistance of those countries that are being attacked. So in any and all of these cases, we are only in a defensive position. In other words, France is not participating in this war.
Did France provide any intelligence to Israel or the Americans against Iran?
We, in no case, are participating in this war.
That being said, France has deployed significant military assets in the Eastern Mediterranean, in the Red Sea, especially the aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle, but also frigates. What happens, for example, in the Red Sea? There are two frigates, if I'm not mistaken. If the Houthis, the Yemeni rebels, proxies of Iran, hit a French frigate, what does France do? Does it stand by? Does it respond in Yemen against Iran?
As you know, there is a European operations that's now in the Red Sea, Aspides operation, and France is part of the Operation Aspides. And as we speak now, we have a frigate and we have deployed a second one. So we have the Languedoc and Provence in that area, and they are there precisely to anticipate and to guarantee freedom of navigation, because that is very important. Around the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb, as we speak, there are navigation activities, and we want this area to continue to have freedom of navigation. That's France's strategy today.
But what if France is attacked by the Houthis? What if a missile strikes a French frigate?
France, at this point, I repeat, is in a situation that is exclusively a defensive position.
Well, clearly, the critical area is the Strait of Hormuz. France is not present in this area until now.
France is not present as we speak, that's right.
This is as we speak.
Every time, this is a way of speaking, but things are changing.
But it's not excluded.
Well, I'm very clear and firm on this topic. At this point, there is no question of sending any vessels to the Strait of Hormuz. The French president said it again in Cyprus on Monday. He explained very clearly that our thinking was this is a diplomatic mission. Why? Because the Strait of Hormuz is 20% of world trade, and this strait interests many in the world. The Indians are very interested in it, as are the Asians, Europeans are as well, and of course all the Gulf countries, for reasons of export, namely of hydrocarbons, but also import. So all these countries depend a great deal on import that come through the Strait of Hormuz. So today, there is not a single ship in the Strait of Hormuz. So for world trade, this is a very important issue.
Well, there are a few vessels, but some have been hit.
Indeed.
Do you know who is behind those strikes?
No.
You have an idea.
I do not know who is behind these strikes. We have only open sources that we are all listening to.
It seems to be Iran, no?
There are comments being made, but these comments have not been checked. That is why I'm saying open sources. I'm reading the same sources as you.
Well, you have other sources.
But what we do know is that there is a potential for mining it.
There you have information of possible mining of the strait.
Here again, there are open sources saying there's a possible mining of this strait. These elements show us the extreme danger of the Strait of Hormuz, hence the impossibility of navigating in that strait.
So the idea is to form a new coalition. There was already a military operation between 2020 and 2024, precisely for the same reasons. It was called Agenor. So the idea, if I understand, because you mentioned Asian countries, it wouldn't be just a European mission, it would be a Euro-Asian mission.
Well, the idea is really to talk to all those who are users, if I may use that expression, and all those who are concerned by the traffic in the Strait of Hormuz, so that everyone could use means to discuss, to open up the discussions. Because once you open up a track for discussions for a diplomatic solution, there is a topic with regard to the shipper owners, the insurance companies that are insuring the ships, so that then there could be the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz that would gradually enable navigation to resume. And I want to be very precise on this point. This is a topic that we can only talk about with regard to weeks and months. Unfortunately, in the days to come, I don't think we will be able to have any traffic going through the Strait of Hormuz, given the important consequences.
You mentioned the French military assets, especially in the United Arab Emirates. There's also a presence in Jordan. have you decided to beef up security measures to protect them? In addition, there are also French interests. We see lots of missiles and drones flying in the area.
Well, of course, there are obviously protective measures of all of these military assets. If I take the case of the United Emirates, our military assets are in the UAE's assets, so we want to protect them as much as we can. We have Rafale jets, and you can understand it's important for the crews and for the planes themselves that they be protected. There are the families. You know that in the Emirates, we have military families living in the United Arab Emirates, and of course there we have taken protective measures for them.
So you mentioned the 400,000 French citizens living in the area, in Israel, Lebanon, the UAE. The president spoke about the need to protect them. We know the French foreign minister is managing all this.
Yes, indeed.
But is there also an emergency evacuation plan with a military component, just in case the situation continues to deteriorate, for instance, in Lebanon?
Well, there are several elements. If we are talking first about the first approach, this is what we've been doing since 28 February. Since then, there have been two elements. First, there were residents, and also this was a school holiday period. Many French people went on vacation to the Emirates or other countries of the region, without forgetting that a place like Dubai is a hub. And so the work that's been done has been done by the Foreign Ministry in partnership with the Transport Ministry and the Ministry of Armies. And so the idea was to repatriate the most vulnerable minors, those who are ill, and we used military aircraft that were taking equipment and coming back empty, so they were able to repatriate citizens. And then we worked with, namely, countries of the Gulf. I'm thinking about the United Arab Emirates, which very quickly opened their airspace so that flights could go to different countries, and we ensured that destinations like Paris would be big enough to take those wanting to be repatriated. Another thing, if we needed to quickly be able to accompany some citizens from Lebanon, we have a fleet close by in the region. We have helicopter carriers that have a capacity to evacuate. So we have capacity, if need be, to quickly evacuate.
I want to turn to Ukraine now. Its President Volodymyr Zelensky is scheduled to meet President Macron in Paris this Friday. The Ukrainians are demanding more anti-aircraft capabilities to face the Russian bombing campaign. And they feel that they could be the collateral victims of this conflict in the Middle East, because all the resources they need are actually being sent to the Gulf. Do you share their concerns?
Well, I hear their fear, but I want to say something very important to them for Ukraine, but also for Gulf countries. When France signs an agreement for partnership, it's reliable. All the countries there know that we have an agreement. We've been there since the first day. Since 2022, February 2022, France has been by Ukraine's side. And if Zelensky is coming tomorrow, it's because we will be working with him, and we will look at all the elements that we are in a position to put at Ukraine's disposal. When I speak of elements, I mean capacity, and you're right. One of the main lessons of conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East is that this is essentially air combat with drones and missiles. These are the two main elements, and that's important. You have to draw conclusions in terms of capacity. And the topic here is that, well, today in Ukraine, France has its capacity.
But it's not enough for Ukrainians.
We are not the only ones. Fortunately, you know that Europe has mobilized itself considerably. To be very concrete, the issue will be how the United States, namely because you know many European countries, with the exception of France, France chose sovereignty. it chose to produce its own missiles, its own fighter jets, to have sovereignty. And there we are looking at this important point. Other European countries have decided to buy from the U.S. And the question which will come up is, will the Americans continue to export in the same way at a time when they have used, namely missiles, in significant quantities? That is one topic. Last week, President Zelensky, by the way, proposed an exchange. He says, I know how to produce effectors. Effectors make it possible to stop missiles. I can exchange the effectors for Patriots. But I have to say that for the time being, as far as I know, he's not had an answer. But we, the French, we continue to do what we can, and this is an issue, including for industrialists, to increase their production capacity, because unfortunately we are in a world that is becoming ever tougher, where we have a greater number of conflicts, so we have to have, indeed, more capacity to obtain missiles, because missiles cannot be produced overnight. This is the very spirit of what the President of the Republic and my predecessor, our Prime Minister, in the National Strategy Review, by updating the military planning law to increase the military budget of France, to increase our capacity. So you see how this concept of updating the military planning law is so important, and it will be discussed just after the municipal elections when Parliament resumes.
Catherine Vautrin, merci beaucoup
Catherine Vautrin, thank you very much for being our guest here on France 24, and thank you all for watching it.
Depuis l'hôtel de Brienne à Paris.